Now, welcome to another lightning response video where I once again will take a question from the comments and try to answer it in a somewhat concise and timely manner, though I already know this is going to be a bit of a long-winded response. Either way, let's get right to it, and this time the question comes to us from TC Waters, who asked, "Hey Thor, if you had Darth Kennedy the Disastrous's job, what would you do going forward to try and heal the fan base? Just movies and show-wise, no other media." Okay, so first of all, we have to start off by identifying what is, I'd argue, the main overarching problem with Star Wars right now that needs to be fixed, because fixing Star Wars by default should fix the fan base, right? I just think that's the better way to look at it here. Anyway, what I see as the biggest overarching issue beyond just how good or bad the current content is that as far as we can see or tell or has been revealed to us, there is no grand plan or vision for the franchise. We just, for the most part, get random content spread throughout the timeline, and every film announcement we get is little more than a vague, "We've hired this person to one day make a Star Wars movie, but we have no idea what that might be." Those are the announcements we get. Which is kind of the opposite of how, say, the MCU does it. They are constantly moving the overall story forward and laying out a roadmap for you to get excited about, or hopefully get excited about, and announcing actual projects instead of just announcing writers and directors who might someday do something if they find the time. And though by no means am I saying that Star Wars has to be, or even should be, quite that mapped out, or should I say transparent with the map, they should have a good idea what they're doing behind closed doors, or that, as I've argued before in other videos, that as long as the content itself is good, as long as you're telling good stories and making good shows and movies, that you can't keep kind of getting away with bouncing all over the timeline, and doing shows that keep elaborating on the already known instead of progressing into the unknown, even though you run the risk of confusing more casual fans with that approach when you're jumping all over the timeline. Even though all that is true, part of the, let's say, allure of franchises, one of the reasons you keep watching them, is because there is always this mystery or possibility of something huge just around the corner, that hanging over your head at pretty much any time is the possibility for pretty much anything. You never know when something could happen that will change everything or be the next major event that shapes the very future of the franchise itself. One of the reasons why, say, Avengers Infinity War is so good is because we didn't know ahead of time how it was all going to end in Endgame. If we had, it makes the snap actually happening at the end of Infinity War far less shocking than it would be if we didn't know it was going to happen, which we didn't. Exploring what's around the corner is almost always going to be more exciting than going back and further exploring what's already gone by. Which isn't to say a prequel of some type can't be great and be enlightening in some capacity, that it does nothing for the greater story, or again that it can't be really good and entertaining in itself. Only that when you know, or there is a set endpoint in the greater story, which is what the sequel trilogy currently is for Star Wars, it is the furthest the story has gone, that there's always going to be some type of, not only limit on what can be done with a story, with what can be done with a prequel, but it'll be missing that feeling of true uncertainty. Unless, of course, you go so far backwards in time to the Old Republic, for example, that the set endpoint becomes almost irrelevant. But I mean, as great as something like Andor was in my opinion, and though I'm sure there will be some twists and turns in Season 2 that will change my perception of some things and give me a greater understanding of others, that it'll enhance the greater story of Star Wars, and that I'll no doubt enjoy it, I do still ultimately know how that greater story will end, or where it's going immediately after at the very least. I know that in Rogue One, Andor will die, and that in the original trilogy, the Empire will be defeated by the rebellion that we see forming in Andor. Which, honestly, knowing that doesn't bother me too much in this particular case, not only because of how well the show is being handled or the story is being told, but yeah, it is kind of interesting in a way to know ahead of time that what feels like these insurmountable odds or this undefeatable Goliath of an opponent that they're facing, that is the Empire of course, that they will be overcome and stopped. That what these dedicated few are putting together, what they're sacrificing, will eventually achieve the impossible. Unfortunately though, thanks to the sequels, I also know that the victorious rebellion, which will form a new republic after defeating the Empire, that they ultimately will fail and be thwarted by what was essentially the reformed remnants of that empire that they had defeated, not to mention the thought to be long since dead Emperor himself. In other words, the big problem with Star Wars right now is that all roads lead to the sequel trilogy, and the franchise, I think, needs to move into not just unexplored times, but completely unknown and uncertain times. It'd be really nice for it to feel like an open-ended story again, not this closed circuit loop where we always more or less know how things have to end in order to align with fixed points in the story that we keep exploring over and over again or adding context to. And even if you love the sequels and want to know the full backstory that leads to them, which I can understand if you enjoy those films, you want to know the whole story, but it does still take some of the, let's say, edge off or out of any story we get because, as I just said, we generally know how things have to go anytime they deal with the big picture. Again, it's never quite as exciting to elaborate on what came before or fill in the blanks or the gaps as it is to move into the unknown and uncertain. Even when that elaboration is fantastic, there is still a little something missing in the story. For example, I think the prequel trilogy was great. It was exciting to see the story of Anakin Skywalker, his fall to the dark side, and becoming Darth Vader. All of that is great, as well as the fall of the Republic and the Jedi Order. It's awesome to see these things, but I did spend the whole time knowing and waiting for it all to happen. Same with something like the Clone Wars animated series. It was a great series, and I highly, highly enjoyed it, especially the later seasons. But I always knew the Jedi Order wasn't going to put it all together before it was too late. I always knew there were certain things that would or couldn't happen. And I think one of the reasons why The Mandalorian was so beloved right out of the gate was actually because it felt like a small, sort of independent story. It didn't matter where all these major roads led to. It didn't matter that the sequel trilogy was looming on the horizon, because it was just the story of a simple man trying to make his way through the galaxy, you could say. But Season 2 expanded the story, and there is the promise of things getting even bigger in scope and scale in this upcoming third season, and we've been told there is some type of crossover series coming that will bring together all the shows or all the characters of this time period, meaning this is going to get more big picture along the way. There's no way this is going to get smaller as it all goes on. Of course, you're going to want some big elaborate story out of all this, and thus this is all something that will likely, to some extent, maybe in a major way, have to be aligning with the sequels or be limited in what it can do because of the sequels. Though something tells me, especially if some of the rumors around the Ahsoka series are true, and potential possible minor spoiler alert here, I think, that I'll give you a moment or two to click away if you don't want anything potentially ruined about that series. Anyway, there's a rumor out there that the Ahsoka series is going to go somewhere completely new and different, maybe even to a different galaxy altogether. Which, yeah, could potentially be cool, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to judge until I see it, and also until the rumor turns out to be true. Though I'd argue the Star Wars galaxy is pretty massive enough in its own right, and you never need to go beyond it. We're talking about billions of planets and countless eons to explore, after all. Not to mention roughly a third of the galaxy is more or less virtually unknown, that being the aptly named unknown regions, other than what we've gotten to learn about that area here and there, mainly through Thrawn and his novels. In other words, if I try to put myself into the mind of Favreau and Filoni for just a moment and try to think how I think they're thinking, it almost sounds like, if the rumors are true, that they're trying to take the story somewhere else entirely, literally, so that they don't have to worry about aligning with the sequels. That they can just ignore them, do their own story, their own thing, and not have to worry about people saying they don't care because all roads lead to the sequel trilogy, because they've taken an exit ramp and are doing all they can to move into unknown territory without actually moving past the endpoint that is the sequels. And so, to finally answer that original question, what would I do to heal the fan base, or how would I fix things? Well, I would do what Disney is unlikely to ever do, for better or worse, and I'd retcon the sequels, though I would do it in story, meaning that I'd have it where they did technically happen. I'd even keep some of the characters from them. But I'd have Ahsoka or Ezra use the world between worlds to alter events, because how the sequels currently end ultimately leads to perhaps some kind of disaster, with the easiest way to do that being to have it where Palpatine actually survives and possesses Rey, and she, or he, has taken on the Skywalker name to essentially fool the galaxy into believing him and following him. Which, yes, was actually the premise of a fanfiction I did, as some of you might remember, or if you want to check it out. And if you wonder why I wouldn't just flat out retcon the sequels and do it all over again with a fresh slate, which, yeah, would be optimal considering you could do whatever, Well, do keep in mind, I would be trying to fix the whole franchise and heal the fan base. I'm not sure that the best way to do that is to just retcon the films that, yes, some fans very much do enjoy. Either way, this then does away with the current set endpoint and actually makes everything going on with The Mandalorian and other shows that will be a part of it, it makes it completely open-ended, which adds a ton of excitement because we don't know where this has to go. It could lead to anywhere and do virtually anything, instead of simply being a road that ultimately leads to the sequels. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and either tell me what you do to heal the fanbase or what you think about my plan, or by all means ask me a question for a future video by starting your comment off with something like, "Hey Thor." Either way, do leave your comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.